Kulavanaka, Maori, Buenos dias. These are all forms of welcome or greeting that we've learned over the last few years as Shelley and I have traveled some 20,000 nautical miles, which is about 35,000 kilometers, on a little boat we call Blowin' Bubbles. Now, I guess the boat name deserves a little introduction. Shelley and I both teach people to scuba dive, and one of the slang terms for scuba diving is blowing bubbles. You're going to go blow some bubbles. And so that's what we name our home. She's a beautiful boat, and I'll talk about her in just a second. But greetings, everyone. And we're going to talk this morning a little bit about our ministry and what we do as we travel. Mostly we just relax and have a good time. So let's get that out of the way and let's be clear about that. I do not confess to working any harder than I have to at anything. We have our time in the morning when we get up that we do our chores. Now, if the boat's sinking, we move that up a little. But most of the time, we allocate a few hours a day to doing work, and the rest of the time we explore and we live and we have an awesome time. We also spend a little bit of time in our world in what we call our Right to Right ministry, which is the next slide. I'm going to try and work this. There we go. And Right to Right ministry was started. Some of you know because I actually came here just before we left and we spoke about our work that we were planning to do. Now, 4 years later, we've done a little, and I'll be talking about that as we go along. And what we thought was we would like to deliver school supplies to kids along the way as we went. But before we could do that, we really had to create our environment. And so we should, for those who don't know Shelley and I, I'm Kyle, and my wife Shelley got here early, so she's got a good seat in the back with the Berry Hill folks, so that's good. We're married. We have 4 grown children, 32, 24, 30, and 22. I think that's it. Did I get that right? Yeah, I did. We have 3 grandchildren, 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and a brand new one just born a few weeks ago, which, okay, ready? 10 pounds, 4 ounces, 13 pounds yesterday. God truly has a sense of humor. My poor daughter. We are both, Shelley and I, fairly well-educated people, and to the best of our knowledge, although you might not think it after I'm done speaking, are fairly sane individuals. After almost 20 years working in the United Church of Canada, I am retired after having first taken a 2-year leave of absence, and I turned 57 years old this year. Shelley is much younger than I am. Our boat, which is the next slide, is a 1981 Dufour. It's a French boat, catch rigged, which means it has 2 masts, and it runs, on a good day, 3 sails. And it was purchased by us in South Carolina in 2010, and we sailed it from South Carolina to Ontario, where we removed it, and we put it on a great big truck and moved it to Guelph, Ontario, and we refit it over 2.5 years. Thank you, Bill and Marion. They own the farm where the boat lived for 2.5 years, and it was quite an undertaking. We did some pretty amazing work. If you want, the next slide shows some of the refit pictures. This was the before shot, kind of, we hope. Basic details. We had it on Bill and Marion's farm for 102 weeks, and during that time, I worked about 480 hours, give or take, on the boat itself. We had dozens and dozens of people help us along the way. It turns out, when I was serving at Berry Hill and Speedside, my day off was on Fridays, and all the men of the church knew my day off was Friday, and I would be at the boat. So there were some Fridays we didn't get very much work done, but we really had good coffee time and lots of good advice, and it was a wonderful experience, just actually refitting the boat. And by refitting, I mean we took out all the electrical and all the plumbing and all the things that were 30 years old in the boat and replaced it to make it our home when we got finished. And when we did get finished, the next slide should show that. She was a beautiful looking boat. Next slide, please. Oh, no. Did we skip some? Okay, cool. All right, well, we'll go on. There we go. We started our journey. No, that's okay. We can go on to the next. There we go. We launched it, and then we started our journey. We started our journey on July the 1st, 2014, and we left Ontario, Canada, went out the Erie Canal. We actually took the masts down off the boat and took it through the Erie Canal and put them back on in the Hudson River, sailed down the Hudson River, out New York City, and then went the 20-odd thousand nautical miles that we have so far. That was the beginning of our journey. Now, I think if you recall, when we were here last, we talked a little bit about our Right to Right program. And our Right to Right program was this ministry we thought we could do, and by sharing a little bit of what we had here in Canada with some of the kids out there in the world. Now, you may recall, I don't want to tell the whole story again, if you recall, Shelley and I began this experience in Cuba when we were there shortly after a hurricane one year. We'd flown down and seen the devastation, and we learned in the schools that we went to that these kids really, really, truly had nothing. And when I say nothing, they had we went into a school one morning, and the children all had an eraser in their hand and a piece of paper, a little stub of an eraser, and they were erasing their sheet of paper. And I asked the teacher why that was, and she said, well, we don't have any paper, so each morning they erase what they learned yesterday so we could start over today. And that was a real wake-up call for us. And we decided we would get together a little bit of school supplies and things like that. So we started kind of small, actually in our kitchen. And the next slide shows we made up these little boxes. And in fact, I know you had one here. Did we lose okay, we've lost. Okay, I'll just talk. We've lost technical stuff here. Did I do that? I couldn't have done that. I probably did that. We had folks at Berry Hill and Speedside Church working with us. They created a gazillion of those cloth bags we talked about for the kids. Not only did they make them then for us, they shipped them to us for the first couple of years we did our ministry. We have now contracted Fijian ladies to make our bags because we're so far away, and they do a good job. Not quite as good as the Speedside bags, I have to say, but nonetheless, we learned in Cuba on the trip that we were giving away pens and pencils or pencil crayons in the original packaging. And in Cuba, when we arrived, we discovered that, in fact, they were selling the stuff in the black market. And that's not a bad thing. The families just didn't have any money. And so when the kids brought home these colorful American pencils in a box, they sold them. So what we do now, everywhere we go that we buy anything, we remove all packaging at source. Now, environmentally, that's a good idea because generally where we find the products we get, fortunately, there's facilities that can manage the waste. In some of these islands, they don't manage waste like that. They just throw it behind the hut. So we get rid of all packaging at source, and we hand the kids this finished piece of product, which we're pretty excited about. So anyway, we have this great stuff delivered to us wherever we go. We have been down, we departed the United States from Florida, went to Cuba. We began our journey in Cuba, and that is, of course, where it started for us when we were there on a vacation. And we learned a lot about what we didn't know how to do in our first stop. As I said, we delivered stuff in original packaging, and they sold it. We found out that there is need in this world that Shelley and I, in our little world, we just can't manage. We went to some schools, and there were 700 children. What do you do with 700 kids? So we learned early in the game that if we were going to help people, we had to be a little bit creative and think out of the box a little bit. And you know, I chose this morning's scripture, the story about Jesus sharing what he had. Little trivia, folks. Let's see how well you know your Bible. What is the only miracle story in the Bible that all four gospel writers decided they wanted to talk about? The loaves and the fishes, folks. Yeah, this is the miracle. This is the miracle that they needed to talk about. This is the one that got talked about by all four gospel writers. And so, from my way of thinking, that gives it a little extra meaning, a little more credibility. Not that they all don't have credibility, but there's certainly a little extra credibility if all four decided this was really important to talk about. Now, I will never take away the magic that Christ has in his ministry, that he could do anything. But part of me doesn't want to believe that this particular miracle had any magic at all. See, part of me wants to believe that there was this itinerant preacher. Now, the four gospel writers talk about it each a little differently, but all of them say that there was this itinerant preacher, Jesus, out talking to people about the good news of Christ in their life, or God in their life. And I don't know about you folks, but I couldn't come home and say, hey, honey, there's this great preacher that I want to go listen to. He's just out in the desert, just outside of town. Yeah, a couple miles. Yes, well, okay, honey. See, my wife is the planner in our relationship. My wife is the one that manages all the details. And I know for an absolute fact that my wife would never let me go listen to this itinerant preacher out in the desert without making sure we had a little snack. I snack heavily. And so my thinking is that in this particular instance, there were a few people like my wife who made sure that some of the people had the bits and pieces they needed when they went out to listen to this itinerant preacher. The miracle of this story is, in my mind, that in fact, some of the people had some stuff. But one of the most favorite things that we as humans do is we covet, don't we? We love to covet. We covet good things. And I think what really happened that morning was a few folks had some stuff, and a few folks didn't have some stuff. And I think the true miracle of that morning was that the folks that had a little stuff, by the example of the little boy sharing the loaves and the fishes that he had, opened not only their picnic baskets or their satchels, but their hearts. And realized that in the moment of that giving, in the moment that you can suddenly now not worry about what you have for yourself, but rather share it with somebody else, the miracle that day was that not only is there enough, here's the miracle, there's something left over. Can you imagine the beauty and the magic of that miracle when we open our hearts and allow ourselves to share? Well, that's kind of what, for Shelley and I, this ministry is about. It's not much. We don't have a lot. We don't have enough to feed 5,000, but we have a little bit in the boat. And we tried our hardest to share what we have. And so when we were in Cuba, go on to the next slide. Thank you very much for fixing this. You guys did great. Technical guys. Because truth is, I'm running out of stories. So, for example, in Cuba, one of the things, our first encounter was with not having stuff. When you all go down to Zehrs or wherever you do your shopping, there's no question that there's going to be a mango sitting there waiting for you. It might be $6, but there's going to be a mango there for you. There's going to be bananas. There's going to be all the things in the world that you want, and you just have to get to the right aisle. Well, in places like Cuba, we've started learning that if you want that tray full of great-looking vegetables, you got to get up really darned early in the morning to get them. And secondly, if it isn't on the market, if it's not there that day, it's not coming. They don't have the breadth of choice that we do in our world. And certainly, we got really excited when we got things like fresh vegetables and fresh fruits and things like that. It was kind of a real treat. Our very first stop was at schools in Cuba. Next slide, please. That bus in the lower left, 62 kids got on that bus every day. They fit, sort of. But they were happy kids. And see, there was the stuff we were delivering in Cuba, and it was in the original packaging in those days, and that's where we encountered that first situation where things didn't quite turn out the way we planned it. So from Cuba, we're now in about November, and we have some very good friends who own a dive shop in Cozumel, Mexico, and asked us if we would pop by at Christmas and give them a hand with the shop. So we did. Off to Mexico we went, and now Shelley and I have been going to Mexico for 20-something years together. And in the entire time we have been visiting Mexico, we had no idea there was a part on this island of Cozumel, which is a very touristy kind of place, kind of a beautiful spot, a place called Las Fincas, or in English it means the farm. And on the farm in Las Fincas, we learned that there was more than 300 families living on subsistence conditions. These folks have no electricity, no running water, no sewage, no schools. They have nothing. And this is in the middle of perhaps one of the most vibrant tourist zones of Mexico. And yet, these places exist. No pavement on the roads. So, divers being divers, Santa Claus actually owns a dive shop in Oklahoma, but don't tell anyone, okay? Got dressed up, and we delivered 300 sets of pens and pencils and school supplies. We didn't have enough of our little cloth bags, so one of the people that worked at the dive shop found us like a cellophane bag, and we were able to make up over 300 of those. And that was a big distribution. We had 3 pickup trucks. We had about 15 Santa and about, 5 or 6 elves. Our daughter was an elf. It was so cute. And all these kids finally got to have a little bit of and we were told later that the gifts that they received from Santa Claus walking through the streets of Las Fincas was probably the only gift they were going to see that Christmas. And so it made us feel pretty good. We were pretty excited about that work. After our time in Mexico, we started heading out for our first real open ocean crossing. And we were actually heading for La Providencia, which is an island in Colombia. But as things happen, they don't always work the way they're supposed to. We lost our freshwater internal water pump in the engine. Now, we had a spare, but we had no way of taking it apart in mid-ocean, and we had broken a pulley. So we had a choice, and by the way, we were using our motor at the time going dead into the easterly trades, and there was no way that we could continue going east under sail, so we had to either go south or go north. And Honduras was south, and Grand Cayman was north. We looked at the price of Grand Cayman, and we went to Honduras. We ended up in this beautiful place called Honduras. Next slide. Well, you can go back one slide if you would, sorry. Honduras, this is a tough place to get caught, really. It was hardship all the way. We were able to find the parts we need, but we also said, okay, we're here for a reason. We had no intention of coming here, but we're here for a reason. Let's go check out the schools around here. And we rented a car one day, and we went to now, I don't know if you know the island of what island were we on? Thank you. Roatan has a west end and an east end. And we were in the west end, and we were exploring the west end. And I got to tell you, these folks were pretty well off. There was beautiful homes, lovely schools. And I'm thinking, okay, well, there's nothing they need from us here. And we mentioned it to one of the locals, and they said, oh, you haven't been to the right end of the island. And I said, what do you mean? He said, go east tomorrow. And we did, and we went east, and we encountered some of the most intense poverty to this point we had ever seen. Folks in Cuba don't have a lot, but they live well under their circumstances for the most part. These folks in the eastern island of Roatan in Honduras have nothing. The worst example was we'd gone to this school, we were bringing bins of stuff in, we'd given away what we could, and the superintendent of education came up to us to say thank you for what we'd done, and did we know of any way that maybe they could get some toilets? And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we have 450 children here in the school, and we have one toilet, and somebody has just stolen our water tank. Somebody has stolen our water tank, so there's no running water to flush the one toilet for 450 kids and staff. We desperately need some toilets. And I said, well, how much would that cost? And I'm thinking like a good Canadian. And he said, oh, we could do the whole thing for $500. I said, $500? Seriously? Absolutely. Well, I said, okay, I'll tell you what. This is the beginning of our trip, and we're feeling a little generous. Meet us at the hardware store tomorrow, and we'll see what we can do. And he did. He came to the hardware store, and we purchased 3 toilets and a water tank for, you can't see the invoice, but it says 11,000 pesos. It worked out to $501. And funny how that worked out, isn't it? But we bought these 3 toilets and this water tank, and he loaded them up in his truck, and he took them back to the schools, and I'm not kidding you, in 7 days, some dads and moms got together, mostly dads. Somebody else, I guess, donated the cinder blocks, and the next day, next slide, 7 days later, they had created a 4-person, like 2-girl, 2-boy bathroom with running water with a sink they could wash their hands. We got on the internet back at where we had the boat, and we said, would anyone like to help? In 22 minutes, we had $500 raised, so we were really happy with that. Not only that 7 days later, they phoned Shelley, they phoned us, and I think I was sick that day. Shelley went down, and I'd never seen this, but there's a ribbon cutting ceremony in Spanish for a bathroom. And then this lucky little girl got to be the first one to wash her hands. Now, we never intended to go to Honduras. That wasn't on the plan. But God surely has plans that we don't have, doesn't he? It just, sometimes things don't work out quite the way we planned them. We eventually got the engine fixed and all was well. And as we were leaving Honduras, and now you gotta, if you can picture the geography, I should have put a map in here. Honduras is sort of in the little arm above South America into Central America. It's sort of in that little crux thingy there, part of Central America where it comes down from Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and then Honduras, and it's tucked in the corner. Well, in that part of the Caribbean, they have what they call easterly trades, which means almost every day of the year, the wind blows out of the east. Well, if you're in the west corner, you're not sailing east. So we waited about a month until we got no wind, and we motored out to the corner, and then we went south to a place called La Providencia, which was the next island. If you want to, we went to Providencia. Yeah, Providencia was very, very well off little island, and so we did not leave any school supplies in La Providencia. We went and visited and had a great time there, but it wasn't what we'd planned. Went to Panama, Bocas del Toro, Panama. This is the rainforest. If you know the geography at all, Panama's here, and then Costa Rica's just above it, and Costa Rica's famous for the rainforests. Well, the rainforests don't end at the border. The northern part of Panama has the same kind of rainforest area. We were so blessed in that part of the world, but the other problem we had was we ended up, if you want to go to the next slide, we had broken some things on the boat, not just the water pump. By then we had broken a lot of things. So this was our first major stop where we had to get some things repaired and replaced on the boat. If you want to go to the next slide, we took a lot of things apart in that marina. And that's one of the joys of living on a boat, by the way. In fact, this is where we adopted our motto in life. We have a motto in life now. If it ain't broken, we don't own it. And we live by that motto quite happily most days. But this was our chance to repair the boat. Now, at this point, we'd been out a little over a year and a half, and we were learning as we went along, as I say. Now, if you remember, I mentioned bananas a minute ago. Go back. Chiquita Bananas has their main production in northern Panama. Twice a week, this container ship, or one of it and his sister, come back and forth. Can you imagine that many bananas in the world? And twice a week, they're coming with a full load of nothing but bananas distributed throughout the world. It was quite an adventure to watch them work, and growing bananas is a science. It is from the time, and a banana tree, I don't know if you know this, only produces fruit once. And then they trim it back, and out of the root ball it grows another tree. And a banana only produces fruit once in 3 years. So it's quite an amazing, next time you pick up a banana at Zehrs, realize a little bit of effort went into this banana. Anyway, so the next slide, if you will. We also had a chance to explore some of the most pretty water we'd ever been in. This picture on the left with the starfish, this was not doctored, this is not photoshopped. That was the beach. That I didn't do anything except snap the picture. And it was quite an amazing place to first visit. All right, the next slide, if you want to look at it, kind of shows what it was like visiting the schools in Panama. Panamanian education is really, really, really good, except when it comes to the indigenous populations. Some of the Indian folks don't get anything. And again, you have to get off the beaten path to even find these folks, because they're not going to come out looking for help. They're certainly appreciative when somebody shows up to share something they have, but they don't go looking for it. And these kids were the most amazing kids. And the fella on the right, that's a dad, and he had just dropped his 2 kids off at school. And lots of times in Bocas, kids are paddled in their dad's canoe maybe 5 miles in any weather to go to school, and they have to put a real effort in. So we really did learn a lot again in Panama. If you go to the next slide, this was now entering in year 2. This is where the trip kind of took a twist. We'd spent a year, 11 months in Panama, and it was time now, well, actually they asked us to leave, but we were only given a 1-year mariner's visa, and it was time to go. So it was time now to go across the Pacific. So to orient yourself, Costa Rica, Panama's on the right-hand side of the screen. That blue line shows approximately, we went by the Galapagos. We wanted to stop at the Galapagos, but it was going to be almost $2,000 US to pull in. And that was just not in our world budget, so we skipped the Galapagos. We sailed 32 days from Panama City over to Fatu Hiva. Now, has anyone ever read the Thor Heyerdahl book, Fatu Hiva? It's a story about this young man in his early life deciding to go and find where the rest of the world lives, and he arrives at an island called Fatu Hiva, and I want to say to you, skip through a couple of these slides. This is provisioning. This is getting us ready for our trip across the ocean. That's an 18-foot long panga or boat, and it is completely and utterly loaded with stuff. Because remember now, this is the last time we're going to see a grocery store for 2 months. And we did load up the boat. Next slide. Got the boat ready to go. Just want to show you something interesting. You've all heard of the Panama Canal? Well, we got to actually traverse the Panama Canal. But that picture on the lower left is a picture of our GPS unit with what we call AIS. It identifies all the ships that are in front of us. It's a new technology, and it's really, really amazing. But every one of those blue marks, that's a container ship or a large ship waiting to go through the Panama Canal. It is the most amazing place in terms of the number of ships that cross and go through there. The commerce that goes on in that part of the world is huge. And so we picked up some suitcases, and sadly, Shelley's mom passed away just before we left Panama. We came home, and we traveled back with 5 more huge suitcases filled with school supplies, and we were ready to cross the Pacific. Next slide. Got the next one? No. We're stuck again? Oh, well, yeah, this is us getting ready to go. We'll just keep going through there. We went to the San Blas Islands. Well, this is grocery shopping in the San Blas Islands. As I said, if you remember, you don't have access to grocery stores, so these enterprising guys put whatever they've got in their boat, and they bring it out and they deliver it to you, and so you get to buy things. This also, by the way, was the first time we'd ever bought a chicken with the head still attached. I thought that was kind of weird. All right, next slide, please. And we did, as I said, we got the thrill of going through the Panama Canal. That was a real life experience, a chance to do that. Next slide. Into Panama City. We'll just keep going. And we, as I said, I mentioned the indigenous kids. We got to help them out. And again, every time we went to a school and they knew we were coming, they would do something for us. These kids had a dance and a show. This is called the free zone in Panama. In Colón, in Panama, there's a place where all the container ships come from the east and they go out to the west and to Europe. The Colón is the place where all the business takes place. It's called the business district of Cologne, or the trade district, and I guess it's a tax-free haven where all these commerce can take place. Well, that's where we hit the mother lode of school supplies, and we were able to buy literally tons, over almost 2 tons of school supplies when we were there, and we just took off. This is where we started taking packaging off its source, repackaging the stuff. We have one of those vacuum sealers on the boat, and so we take 1,000 pencils and vacuum seal them and then put them under the floorboards and try and keep a little bit of room to live, but make sure we have enough room for our pens and pencils. Next slide, please. Just tough life, got to tell you. And this is on the way to the crossing, by the way, on a sailboat our size is anywhere from 26 days to 40 days. Our crossing was 32 days. And that's when I reread my first American edition, Fatu Hiva. Next slide. And we crossed the equator. Now, I don't know if you know this. You're all, I shouldn't speak. Most of you are probably polywogs. Now, I mean polywogs because as seafarers go, until you have crossed the equator, you are a polywog. When you have crossed the equator for the first time, you become a shellback. And there's an entire ritual that takes place at the equator where you pay libations to King Neptune. And if you don't, then you'll be in trouble. And if there's a shellback on the vessel, they become entitled to, shall we say, initiate you into the fraternity. As it turns out, all 3 of us were polywogs, and so we just celebrated. We had a young lady who's like a daughter to us, who was thinking about getting a sailboat and doing what we're doing. We said, well, before you do that, why don't you come play with us and sail with us? And she was our 3rd crew member for the crossing, which made watches a lot easier. You see, when you're in a sailboat, you can't just pull over at a Holiday Inn and get a night's sleep. You're going, and so somebody's always got to be on or near the helm, watching and looking out for other things. And so when Shelley and I are alone, we do 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And so I work from 6 to 11. Shelley's on from 11 till 3, and then I come back on from 3 till morning. And it's not as hard as it sounds. It takes a few days for your body to adjust and you get used to it. But with a 3rd person, we changed it to 3 hours on and 6 hours off. So you can sleep like a real person. It was kind of fun. Anyway, so we crossed the equator. There is a message in a bottle floating around the Pacific. We wax sealed a bottle and a message in it. We have not heard back. And this was our arrival into Fatu Hiva. It was literally the first time in our trip that my breath was taken away. It was, I mean, you want to imagine, I'm sure we all imagine the majesty of God in this world. This was truly breathtaking. It was the most amazing place. Yes, we hiked up there. That's our boat way down at the bottom. It is truly a place in the French Marquesas Islands that is worth imagining. I will confess, I did put these slides in. We did no distribution of school goods in French Polynesia. The French government is amazing in that part of the world. These kids are well educated. Their schools are second to none. They have the best cheeses in the world, and they fly in from France every day. It's amazing. But it was a beautiful place. If you can't think of anywhere to go for vacation, put this near the top of the list. It is quite an amazing place. Carry on. We did some fishing. Do you see the size of that mahi-mahi? That baby nearly took me off the back of the boat. We do a lot of fishing. Now, for those of you who are fishermen out there, or fisher people, when I'm fishing, I don't mess around. Oh, my wife is holding up her arm. I watch. I'll wrap this up quickly. We do a lot of fishing. We run 6 lines off our boat when we're fishing. Gets a little crazy, but that was a big, nice mahi-mahi. This is the Tuamotus. Let's just skip through some of the slides. As I say, we do some diving. Some of the amazing dives down there, just, again, breathtaking. The Society Islands, this is that rich, lush stuff they talk about in the movies. You can't stumble along any path or corridor without finding something to eat. There's just an amazing amount of food. Polynesian dancing. We'll just keep going through the slides. This is the stuff that the postcards are made of, and they really do that stuff here. Although we did get addicted to something called Hivas. Now, I want to say, just really quickly, that, you know, these folks do dancing for tourists, But for Polynesian people, an integral cornerstone of their faith is dancing. And they're about 96%, 97% Christian folks in this part of the world. And going to church means something to them. But dancing means so much. And from the tiniest village to the greatest, organization, these folks are always dancing. Sometimes if you need cooking gas, propane, you have to get it yourself. You hang a bottle upside down and you use gravity to feed your bottle. Apparently it's not the safest thing you can do on a boat, but if you got to cook, you got to do what you got to do. It will keep going. And so year 3, we left French Polynesia, traveled through the Cook Islands, down to New Zealand, and then up to Fiji. We'll just keep going really quickly. And then we traveled our first 10,000 miles. And I'm going to take a minute and talk just very briefly about Palmerston Island, because this is pretty meaningful for us. As John alluded to, when he was at Palmerston United Church here in Ontario, I did my internship with John. And when I left Palmerston, Ontario, I was given this beautiful Mexican stole. Remember the purple one? It was really beautiful. And when I was ordained, John gave me a stole that's just like his. That stole is on our boat, but I'd also taken the Palmerston stole on the boat with me. And so we stopped at this little island. Now, this little island has 54 human beings on it. Actually, 55, because one got born when we were there. 55 people on it, all right? A guy named William Marsters not discovered the island, but settled on the island with 3, count them, 3 Polynesian wives. Each wife had 7 children, so he had 21 children. This was in the 1800s. In 2017, there are 55 people living on the island, and they're all direct descendants of William. They have strict rules about who can marry, and the boys often go off somewhere else to find a wife, but you're not allowed to live on the island unless you're either a direct descendant or married to a descendant of Marsters. They maintain his tomb or his burial area, and this island, you have to anchor outside the island in about 80 feet of water, and then they come in and bring you in. And as soon as you're there, they see 15 boats a year. But as soon as you're there, you're adopted into a family. Keep going. Excuse me, I'm sorry to do that. We didn't cook or eat on our boat for the 12 days we were on the island. They wouldn't let us. We were always invited for dinner. We visited the school. This was the first time we'd gotten into a school. They don't have very much, so we shared what we have, but they were certainly able to look after themselves. These people are the most resort. They see 3 supply ships a year, and there's no airport, so 3 times a year they have contact with the outside world. And until satellites, they only communicated by long-range radio. While we were there, the Summer Olympics were on, and not to be left out, Palmerston had their own Olympics with Brazil, the Cook Islands, Samoa, and the USA. And they created their teams. And because there wasn't enough kids in the school, everyone on the island participated. Next slide. Those photos just give you an idea of how much fun people can have. And we ate, and we went to church. You want to have a dance, you have a dance. So anyway, I was invited to speak at their church. And interestingly enough, when I was finished, I took my stole off, and that stole is now at Palmerston Church on Palmerston Island in the middle of the Pacific. And so we went on to Tonga, which is an amazing kind of place. Again, we live amongst school supplies. Do you notice that? We do our best and we get cruisers. We make other cruisers help us. When we get erasers, if we don't have enough, we cut them in half, and we get other cruisers to help us put the supplies together. Again, I started wearing a dress about this time in my life, because that's what everyone does. You look kind of out of place in a pair of trousers, gentlemen, so you just get to know everyone. And this was a well-found school. This school actually had benches, so they were pretty well off. Keep going. They're really, interestingly enough, I was at this school during a week of school holidays. But to go to high school there is a privilege, and so there's an exam to get in, and these kids were the kids that were due to go to high school the next year, and they were in on their week off studying for this test they have to take to be allowed to go to what they call college, which is the equivalent to our high school. Another tough day at the office. The king of Tonga, who last year passed away, but it's a pretty big deal to these folks. You thought Easter Island was the only place they had weird stones. There's a long story, I won't share it here, but those stones were actually done about 1,000 years ago. Next slide. Fueling the boat. You know, you all go up to the gas station and complain about the price. Wait till you have to dinghy about 15 miles until you can get a little bit of gas. And they deliver it by barrel, and that's how we normally fuel our boat. Fortunately, we only have to fuel the boat about twice a year. On to New Zealand. New Zealand is like Canada 2.0. They're just like us, but they talk funny. And of course, we had this great experience where we got real food, like going back to the grocery store and everything was there. Oh, and I had to throw that slide in. Our daughter joined us at Christmas, and apparently we weren't well educated. We had to take the girls to Hobbitville, Hobbittown, and that's where they do the, it's gone a blank. There's a movie. Anyway, Lord of the Rings, that's right. Well, that's where it was filmed, and we went there, and now we're experts. Okay, lots of amazing hiking. Notice the sweater. It was getting cold, so it was getting time to leave. Notice the sweater. All right, carrying on, keep going through. Off to Fiji. We left New Zealand just at the tail end of cyclone season, and weather's important to us, and so we had to dodge one cyclone on the way up, but we did well. We got all the way around it, and it was fine. We arrived in Fiji, and that's where we spent 7.5 months last year. I'm going to wrap it up because you all want to eat lunch at some point today, but I want to say the work that we've done has been the most life-changing experience that I can imagine. We're not a big organization. We're just two people on a sailboat. And we just love the opportunity to touch and greet and meet people from a different place. And as much as we like to think we're different, in so many ways we're very much the same. We've been given incredible gifts. We were at a little atoll called Abiyan, which doesn't see anyone ever. We arranged to drop some school supplies off one day. There was 130 kids there. They all showed up. They sang for us. They danced for us. And when we went to leave, it took 9 boys to carry the gifts of food that they gave us back to our boat. They weren't having any part of us just dropping off school supplies, giving them something without them giving something in return. And I guess that's part of what I've learned. Going back now to the gospel, you know, when you share what you have, not only is there always going to be enough, but remember, folks, there's going to be something left over. I'm sorry if you're not going to get anything done today. I appreciate, John, you allowing me to come and the folks here that made that decision. I really pray that all of you have something in your lives that brings you as much joy as what Shelley and I have.